Welcome, my name is Ashley, and you have found your way to the Nell and Joe Crafts Kings Nativity tutorial. I'm going to walk you through how to stitch the hoop and all the things you need to know along the way.
A quick note before we jump into stitching. For the King's hoop, the blanket on the camel's back has some straight lines that are a little bit hard to trace perfectly by hand. So if you use a card like the one your needle came on, or a credit card, or a ruler, some sort of straight edge as you trace, you're going to get a much better pattern transfer, which will make the stitching later on in your hoop significantly easier. With that said, let's jump into the stitching of our hoop.
First thing we need to know is where to find your stitch diagram. So this main instructions page is going to be your best friend. Up here, we're going to talk about the order in which we stitch things, which is important. And then we're going to talk about what stitches go where, how many strands of floss to use, and what color. And from up here, we learn that we're going to be working on the weaves, the basket weave stitch for all three shepherds, all three kings first. Reason being that as you weave, we don't want to get our needle caught in all of this other detail work around. So we're going to get those out of the way first and then move on to everything else. So I'm going to start over here with basket weave number 1. We're going to use 6 strands of DMC 822 and we're going to get started there. So I have a decently long strand here. I have a knot at the end of my thread. And what we're going to do first is we're going to set down a set of foundation stitches. So these stitches are going to go one direction, all this way, and then we'll come back and we'll weave going the other direction, perpendicular to our first stitches. So we're going to use this long, almost straight, it does have a little curve to it, but mostly straight line right here as our guide for these foundation stitches. So I'm going to come up here at the base of the line, and I'm coming up just below it. I'm not coming up right on it because I want this thread to kind of sit right to the right of the line. I don't want to be on it or to the left, because as we weave, we need to be able to go over this thread as well as under it. So once I have that, I come up and then we're going to pull the thread across to see where we want it to lay. And again, we're not going to the left, we're not going on, we're going slightly to the right. Here in person, I can see just the tiniest hint of this black line that I drew right along the side, and that's what I'm looking for. So then I'm going to go down into the fabric by sliding this out of the way just slightly. And again, I'm going on the line here because we want to make it all the way up to the top and pull down. And then I'm going to check and see how I feel about this line. Feels good to me, so I'm going to continue. If you didn't like this line, now is the time to change because it's going to be our guide for everything else we do next. So I'm going to come up on this top. We're going to fill in this section here first. And I'm going to check and make sure that my needle is just laying right next to my thread and not smooshing it out of the way. You can see here it starts to move it when I angle it. When I match the angle, it's just nesting right next to it, and that's what I want to see. Then we're going to pull our thread down gently. Don't want to pull too tight here. And see where we're going to end up. Because we got a lot of angles going on, and it can be hard to determine exactly where this needle point should go. We're going to go down there, and then we repeat going the other direction. Now, what I'm looking for here is I want just a teeniest bit of daylight between my stitches. I don't want big gaps, just a teeny tiny bit. We want them to be neighbors, but not touching. This just makes weaving a little bit easier, but it makes the finished product, the finished weave, be fully solid and cover everything when we have these threads being very close together but not quite touching. So I'm just going to keep adding stitch by stitch, going nice and slow, checking as I go to make sure that I have everything where I want it to be. All right, with the top half done, now we're going to jump and fill in the bottom. So I'm going to follow the same process I have been, now just going down instead of up. We're going to end up with about 4 or 5 stitches in this part right here. Which is good. We want to have probably at least 4 stitches filling this skinny spot right here so that we have something to weave as we go along. All right, that was my last stitch for this section of floss. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make sure I'm going to anchor very securely, because everything that we do after here is connected to these stitches. So we want to make sure that our anchor isn't going to come out, and we'll want to do that for all the basket weaves. Anytime we stop and trade floss, just make sure that you anchor very strongly. This means maybe you tie an extra knot, make sure you split some threads as you go, just make sure that the knot isn't going to come undone on you. So I'm going to anchor off, get a new thread, finish filling in this space, and then we'll start weaving. Now that our raised stitches are all the way filled in, it's time to start weaving. So all of your weave instructions are based off the same. O's indicate overs, U's indicate unders. There's a base pattern that's going to be between the stars. For this first one, it's over 2, under 2. And we're going to work in pairs. You can see there's 2 black lines going across, 2 black lines, and there's also 2 vertical lines, but we're working horizontal right now. So you can see there's 2 black lines. So the first pair of stitches goes over 2, under 2, and then we're going to offset by 1 thread. So we're going to go under 1 and then over 2, under 2. Now, we'll talk through this as we go. Just wanted you to understand a little bit better what you've got going on here so you can refer back to it if you need a visual. So we're going to aim to get our stitches to go perpendicular to our original base stitches. So I'm going to come up here in this nice kind of right next to this nice kind of fat zone here so I can get my thread to go where I want it to go. And I'm just going to check and kind of eyeball where I'm going so I know where I want to finish. And then I'm going to flip my needle over, and I'm going to use the eye of the needle to weave with, because the tip of the needle tends to get stuck or split threads as we go, and we don't want to do that. We want to leave each strand whole. So our first instruction is over 2. So I'm going to go over 2 strands, and then I'm going to go under 2 strands. Then I go over, and then I go under. Now, if you want to just go over or under one time and then pull through, that's cool. Or you can get as many on your needle as possible. Whatever works best for you. So I just went under, so now I go over 2, under 2. And you can see that if I'm struggling and I get stuck, how I came up here to the edges. That's a great way to get your needle in and out if you're struggling to get it right in the middle where you are. Now I go over, under, over, and I think I gotta go under both those too. Check out how that line falls. All right, I'm just gonna take a second, take a little breather, make sure that my line fills pretty perpendicular to the rest of my stitches, and I feel good about that. So I am going to go down into the fabric right here at the end of that row. Now, we are working in pairs, which means our next stitch down is going to be the exact same thing that we just did. So I'm going to come up. These 2 were unders, so this teeny little one right here has to be an over for me. So I'm going to come up right next to it so I can go over it. Again, making sure that I'm not pulling too hard. We just want these stitches to sit in here, not to pull our fabric in and make it pucker around the edges. So I'm going to go over 1 because these are under 2. And then I'm just going to follow my thread where it was on the previous stitch and pull it all the way through. And that gets me, back this up here just a little bit on the edge, it was a little funky. That gets me my first pair. So I'm going to go down in the fabric right next to the first stitch, and then we're going to move down to the next pair of stitches. So our next pair of stitches are under 1, then over 2, under 2, repeat. So I come up. So under 1, then we go over 2, then under 2. Oh, I think I split that one. Hold that thought. There we go. Under 2, over 2, under 2. Now I'm going to stop before I get to this corner here and adjust my stitches so I can see where everything needs to be a little bit better. They will get closer together as we add more stitches. But I just went under 2, so now I need to go over 2, but then under. Now I don't need to pull my needle all the way out because it's like half a stitch here at the end. So I'm just going to push my needle into the fabric under those stitches. It doesn't really matter where it goes as long as I don't see any needle on the outside. And pull that down. Now we repeat by going back the other direction. So I can see just the teeniest bit of these stitches right here. So I'm going to come up to then be able to cover them with my over. And then I just follow back the other way. It is 100% okay to just keep referring back to your pattern every time. However, I'm going to teach you a little way to be able to read your embroidery and not have to go back to the guide every time unless you want to. So I'm going to come up for my next stitch, and I know that every pair of stitches we're moving the first over 2 over to the right 1 stitch. So I know that I need to have an over 2 that's right here, because this is my last over 2 and it needs to be right here, over right 1 stitch on the next row. So that means I need to go under 2 first, and then we're going to go over 2, under 2. So if you take a minute to try and read the embroidery, it can be a little bit easier than having to go back to the pattern every time. With that said, the pattern will guide you step by step every single time. So if that doesn't work for you, don't stress about it. Just go back to the pattern and read what the next row is. Under 2, over 2. I don't think we're going to make it farther down this guy, so I'm going to go in right here. All right, that's the third pair. Pair 4 is over 1, under 2, then our base repeat. And again, we could check that by saying our over 2 needs to go over by 1 thread, which puts it over these 2 strands right here, which means we've got an under and an over. So over 1, under 2, then our base repeat of over 2, splitting, nope, and under 2. All right, I've made 4 pairs down. Pair 5 is exactly like 1. So we've got a 4 line, if you will, 4 pair repeat. By pair 5, we're back to our original over 2, under 2. So we're just going to keep working all the way down here over 2, under 2, editing as we need so that the pattern continues all the way down. Finished through the bottom, and now we need to work from the center up, which is going to be a little bit harder because we're going to keep adding some lines here, so things are going to get just a little bit trickier to figure out, but we're going to work through it together. So first, let's look at where we are. Our last pair right here, or the top pair I should say, is an over 2, under 2. It was our first row, so it's going to be like pair 1 or pair 5 here, over 2, under 2 from the edge. Now this first string here, I haven't added or minused any strings because I'm starting right next to the same one here. So to find out what we're going to do for this next pair right here, I want you to find over 2, under 2 that has lines above it. And we're just going to go up 1 in our pattern. And you'll see that we have an over 1, under 2, then over 2, under 2. So we need to go over 1, then under 2 for this line. Alternately, you could take a second and read the embroidery to figure out where we need to go. So if we did it that way, we can see that we have this over 2 here and the over 2 here, and the over 2 needs to move this time to the left instead of to the right. It goes to the right as we're going down. We're going up now, so it's going to go to the left. The over 2 means to go to the left. So you can see that now my over 2 has gone to the left, 1 thread. I have 1 here. So you could count from the edge and say, okay, I need an over 2 to go left, 1. So that means you only go over 1 and then under 2, over 2. Either method of looking at the pattern and going from there or trying to read the embroidery, both work. I'm sure I've said that before, and I'm sure I'm going to say it again. I just want to give you options so that you don't feel stuck and you can feel confident in making this weave happen. All right, now we're going to go up another pair. Our last pair was, we went up from 5, pair 5 to 4, which was the over 1, under 2, over 2, under 2. And so up to pair 3 should be under 2, over 2, under 2. However, that works if this strand right here, let's see if I can catch it with my needle, is the first strand, because that's the first strand on all of these pairs. So from this strand, we need to go under 2 starting here. So we need to figure out what happens 1 strand before. And now the fabulous thing about this pattern is if this is an under 2, these 2 right here would be an under 2. We know that this one, moving left 1, is an over, because everything is 2s. It's either under or over 2. So I'm going to go over 1. Then we knew from our pattern starting on this left line of this pair that we need to go under 2. So that's our under 2. And then we'll just continue filling that pattern for a second. And then I can check real quick here with my needle. And I can see that my pattern is consistent here. I've moved over 1 strand. Everything looks like it's following the same if you kind of follow this visual lineup. So I know that I've done that right, and I can pull it through, finish the line, and go back and then set up for the next line. All right, for this next pair up, I'm going to use, since I'm starting on this same strand here, I'm going to use this strand as my part in the pattern I need to find. So the first thing that happens on this pair is an over 1. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to find an over 1 that has pieces above it. And you can see that line 4 here is an over 1. So I'm going to start with an under 2 because I'm starting on this same stitch, right? So under 2, hopefully I didn't say over. Sorry if I did. Under 2, that's what the paper said. So we're going to go under 2, over 2, under 2. All right, I'm ready for the next pair. And this time, I'm going to see if I can figure it out without having to pull my pattern in. So I've added a line, first of all, so I need to make sure I account for that. And then I'm going to find an over 2. Those are easiest for me to see. So I'm going to find an over 2. And I know my over 2 needs to move to the left 1 strand. So I know I'm going to go over these 2 strands that I just put my needle under, which means that these 2 strands right here to the left, those are going to be under. So those are going to be under and those are going to be over so that this over 2 moves. So again, hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Actually, let's do it again, but this time I'm going to do it with the under 2, which I have right here and right here, but I want to do the one close to the edge so that I can slide my needle under and make that make a little bit more sense. So the under 2, just like the over 2, needs to move over to the left 1 strand as I go up. So I have an under 2 right here, and I need to move over 1 strand. So I'm gonna cover up that first one and go under. So I know that my first 2 go under, and then I'm gonna go over 2 and then under. And we'll stop and check here in a second after I've threaded my needle through some of these to make sure that we like how that is looking. All right, and I see that I'm on the pattern, so I will continue in this method all the way up to the top, and if I think of anything else that is super important for you to know, I'll tell you. And here's what my king looks like all the way stitched through. I just stitched as high as I could up through the top here. My last stitch is right here. I think it's right there. Last pair is right here. I didn't try and add anything up here at the top. So just carry your stitches as far up as you can and then make sure that any space right here is filled in so that your stitches go right up against this line for the head. I ended up having to add 1 stitch back this original direction so that I didn't have any gap there. Now that this guy is done,
you have reached the end of part 1. We will work on the second weave in part 2 of our Nativity Kings tutorial. So check back in for part 2 so we can keep on stitching our hoop.